Hello, my name is Emily Greenfield, and the title of this lecture is Elder Economic Security. The purpose of this video is to introduce the concept of economic security in later life and how it has been used to advance efforts around income assistance in the United States and in New Jersey. To begin to understand the term economic security, we have to know a little bit about the federal poverty measure, which has been the primary tool to discuss issues around economic well-being in the U.S. since the 1960s. The federal poverty measure specifies how much income a person or a household can have before they are no longer eligible for income assistance programs, which use government dollars to support them, in large part. For example, who is eligible for Medicaid as a health insurance program for low-income people is based in part on people's income relative to the federal poverty measure. As another example, eligibility for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly called food stamps, is also based on the federal poverty measure. Let's look at the federal poverty measure for 2014, which is determined by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For a person to be considered impoverished in 2014, a person living alone in their residence could have an income of no greater than $11,670. If there are two people living as a couple in a house, they could have no more than $15,730. Not that much, right? The federal poverty measure was created in the early 1960s to provide a conservative measure of poverty in the United States. Since its inception, it has faced criticism from advocates, researchers, and government officials alike. However, for the purpose of this course, we don't have to go too much into these critiques in great detail. However, there is one important thing to understand for this video lecture, which is that the federal poverty measure always was intended to assess when people do not have enough. As Molly Oshransky, the staff person in the Social Security Administration who created the measure, wrote in an article in 1965, quote, "It is not possible to state unequivocally how much is enough. It should be possible to assert with confidence how much, on an average, is too little." According to federal poverty guidelines, older adults, on average, are not the population at greatest risk for having too little income. Consider this figure. You'll see here that it is actually children who face the greatest risk of being impoverished according to the federal poverty measure, with 1 out of 5 children living in households that are below the federal poverty line. Among adults ages 65 and older, it is 1 in 10. Nevertheless, advocates are quick to point out that this does not necessarily mean that the vast majority of older adults have enough to meet even their basic needs. Although Social Security benefits for many older people keep them above the federal poverty line, Social Security benefits do not make them economically well. This is where the concept of elder economic security comes in. Elder economic security addresses whether older adults have enough income or cash flow on a regular basis to meet their basic needs and to have a minimally decent standard of living now and in the future. Recognizing the importance of this concept for better characterizing the economic status of older adults, Wider Opportunities for Women, a nonprofit group in Washington, D.C., partnered with the University of Massachusetts in Boston to conduct a national research project on assessing the economic security of older adults, state by state. New Jersey was one of the earliest sites for this project, with the New Jersey Foundation for Aging taking the lead. Here are 2 key questions that the project in New Jersey aimed to address. First, how much income do people in New Jersey need to be economically secure in later life? And second, to what extent do older adults in New Jersey achieve that income level? To answer these questions, the researchers first specified the major categories of items that older adults spend their money on to meet their basic needs. These categories included housing, like how much you pay in your rent, or how much you pay for a mortgage, the cost of food, healthcare costs such as premiums and out-of-pocket charges for healthcare services, co-payments, the cost of transportation in New Jersey, operationalized as how much it costs to drive your car, and miscellaneous items such as the cost of clothing, toothbrushes, telephone service, etc. Using data that were publicly available, the researchers estimated how much people would need to spend in each of these categories to meet their basic needs. Unlike the federal poverty measure, however, the researchers acknowledged that costs in each category would differ for various subgroups of older adults. For example, the cost of housing would differ depending on which county you live in, whether you are living alone or with a partner, and whether you rent or own your own home. Acknowledging these differences, the researchers were able to specify what the monthly costs are on average for various subgroups of older adults. The table here shows the figures for New Jersey on average, although it is important to note that we could replicate this table and specify it for every county in the state. Basically, the project estimated that it takes a single elder between $25,320 and $37,320 per year to meet their basic needs and achieve economic security in New Jersey. The exact amount in between those two figures depends on whether they own their house, whether they're renters, or whether they're paying a mortgage. This is quite a bit more than the $11,670 as specified by the federal poverty measure, right? Also note that the major categories of costs in New Jersey include housing, here on the top row, and healthcare in the fourth row. Now that we have reviewed these figures, we can ask the question of how economically secure are elders in New Jersey. In the 2012 report, the New Jersey Foundation for Aging concluded that only about 57% of adults ages 65 plus in New Jersey meet the criteria for economic security. Among the 43% of New Jerseyans who are not financially secure, only 7% meet the level of impoverishment, as determined by the federal poverty measure. It's a big difference, meaning that there's many people for whom the federal poverty measure masks their economic insecurity. Before concluding this lecture, let's take a minute to explain how this research project has launched a national campaign around economic security in later life. People who have participated in this project have used the findings and the tool itself for a variety of purposes, including direct service, policy, and advocacy. As an example of using the Elder Economic Index in direct service, area agencies on aging in California are using the tool to assess the economic well-being of specific clients and speaking with them about how income assistance programs can help promote their long-term economic well-being. As an example of the use of the index in policy, advocates have used the tool in an effort to convince policymakers that the eligibility requirements for income assistance programs should not be based on the federal poverty measure, but instead should be based on the concept of economic security. And finally, as an example of advocacy, people have used the statistics that the measure has generated, such as that 43% of older New Jerseyans do not have enough income to meet their basic needs and to be secure for the future, to encourage policymakers not to cut funds for benefit programs, such as food stamps. For more discussion on how this tool has been used, please refer to the link listed on this slide. This concludes this video lecture on elder economic security.